So first of all, I took a sentence of your description of the book you hope to make, and I think this sentence is sort of the link between the work you want to do and the work I do. Holding space and time together in drawing. I'm a landscape architect, so I will take that perspective. And the work I do, you can start in many ways, and as Simone was before me, I thought, is there a sort of beautiful bridge? And there is really a beautiful bridge, and I hope that it works, because in landscape architecture there is Lawrence Halprin, who is an American guy of the 60s, and Lawrence Halprin was married with Anne Halprin, and Anne Halprin was a choreographer. And he was fascinated by how Anne Halprin did in a participatory way dance performance. And then he thought of using that technique of notating movement in landscape architecture. And he started, for example, to make this coded mapping or diagrams of how people move and behave in space. Now, the interesting difference with Simone, as far as I can see from her lecture, is that in my case, there is a transition to design. So there is a notation of what people do, and the next question could be, but what is the design problem in it? Where should it lead to? What should be the conclusion out of it? This is the book Lawrence Halprin wrote, the RSVP cycle, and the funny thing is that it has a bit of a cult status, so you have to pay €2,000 to obtain the hardcover, but it's also in the library. So what he did was, on one side, trying to make analytical drawings in which time had a large share, and for me in my research this was very important because he was one of the first modern landscape architects who really faced the problem of having time in your drawings, and then he made the step to design with it. So this is a sort of designed mapping of a fountain, how it would act through time. So you could say this is a sort of score in music words of how the fountain should act. And this, for example, is a typical 60s happenings plan, you could say. It instructs people how to move to space. So it does not record movement, but it instructs movement. And that would be the step from notating to design. When I work with my students in Delft, there are always students interested in mapping, so this would relate to this mapping word. And I also worked a lot with students from choreography. And here again, there is a sort of cross-section between mapping, designing, scoring, because this preceded a dance performance. So this was only to start in this way, because I think it relates a bit to your work. This is me, but I'm already introduced by Séverine. But what I can add to it, as a landscape architect, I worked a lot on, it's a big jump from dance performance to river dike reinforcement. But as a landscape architect, that was the work I did. And the point I want to make is that if you work along rivers, you work in natural systems, and your design is subject to a lot of changes. And that relates to what we discussed today, how time, drawing, change and dynamics come together. I also worked a lot in the Ruhrgebiet area with the river Emscher, which is also a lot about time and change and dynamics of the system. I will come back to that. In 2017 I did my dissertation. This is the front cover. So it is about the typical landscape issue that things are dynamic and how you could catch that dynamism in representations. And to be clear on that, my frustration was that every landscape architect would argue, oh no, but my work is about dynamics. But if you would read the drawings, you could see that the drawing tradition is more related to architecture, and perhaps Jamie has another view on that. But I think in the architecture tradition, drawing is more about the thing you want to realize as a sort of end goal, and then you can arrive at it, and then it is there. But landscape is quite different, and we all know that, but it is not reflected in drawings. That was my frustration to start it. And I asked Séverine, but how do you know me? And this was the answer. We made this journal with the University of Delft 2 years ago, so that's publicly available. So if I speak about time, I think this is a nice diagram, by the way, from a very beautiful book, Time Maps, from Eviato Zerubbabel. I don't know if you know it, but I found it very inspiring for my work. And this scheme is quite simple, but it expresses two key notions for my work, and that is the circular and the progressive time. Circular, like in landscape, the seasons, it repeats itself, it changes but it repeats, and progressive, like the tree, it grows. And these are from a physical perspective, the main time issues in landscape I have to face. However, it is crossed with this beautiful scheme from the long now foundation, very beautiful word, the long now foundation. I would like to start such a foundation, but I did not, it is already started. But the point is, if you look at the now, you could say in landscape terms, it is like a plant flowering. It happens for a few days, it happens in a few days or in a few weeks, but you also have the nowadays, like building a city or something like that, which can happen in a few decades. But landscape is also about the ice ages and the centuries, and that's the very long time scale in which we operate. So that is for me also foundational. I come back to that. So if I very shortly tell you my core problem, then it is this, that as landscape architects and casu quo, perhaps architects, we make drawings, and this would be in my words a plan drawing. And I guess you all understand the word plan drawing, you want to make something, this is the plan. And then in modern times we make beautiful visualizations of what we want to reach with that plan. And then comes reality, and this was the reality of the estate they wanted to build. And the visualization suggests we have nice big trees, but alas, that takes a few decades, and this is reality. And the beautiful thing is that the map is into the reality, giving the tension between what you want and the reality of having to have patience. And that is totally not reflecting in the drawings. And then I came to what is for me a core element in my research work, that we as landscape architects work in the tradition of the architect to show what are we doing and where are we doing it, and we have plans and sections and visualizations, and it's all beautiful and all correct, but it misses the point of who is doing it, when, which is more the choreographic aspect of it. And that would lead perhaps to very other drawings we do not have or do not use, or to the use of drawings we have in a different way. So that was what I approached in my research, which has, in my view, an urgency. And I think that also beautifully relates to the work you want to do. We are facing big societal and environmental changes, which are a lot about dynamism in time. So I think we can have a role in that. I see it as a theoretical inconsistency of my profession. I think that's not so important here, but it was a main objective for me, and also as a thing I want to repair in education. So I do a lot of workshops, because I think it's good for students to learn it. And I think it strengthens the position of landscape design in these transformation processes we have. So as I was not totally sure how I could connect to your work, I thought I'd take 4 entrances of things I think that connects it. And I will shortly present each of them. And the first is the life of the drawing. I found it, I must say, very striking for myself that we just learn to draw, and it seems like a sort of daily thing. You just make a plan. But if you think about it in more philosophical terms, a drawing is a very strange thing in its relation to reality. First of all, you can look at it in a historic way. This is a drawing from the 16th century, and surprisingly, you can immediately understand what is happening here in the drawing. I think you can. It is a sort of codification we all understand. Just as a language, we have to learn how to read this drawing. But for example, in landscape, you have to realize that we really needed inventions how to draw, for example, a swamp or a forest in a way that it communicated a more or less objective language that we all understood, which also relate to technique, to material, and how that progressed. And this I found very funny in a student workshop, and the student was making a point that if you want to draw architecture, you could argue a building is in front of you, so the drawing should reflect that view. But landscape is around you, so how can you make a drawing as if it would be in front of you? It's never in front of you. So that's also a nice philosophical point, and I think this is a very strikingly the landscape will be part of the lecture. That's beautiful. I like this drawing a lot because it is a drawing of a stairs, and it is put on a real stair. And now the point was that nobody was sure if you could use the stair because it was a drawing, or it was a stair, or it was a drawing, or it was a stair. And I like this sort of inconsistency. There is a really beautiful article on it, and it's called The Twinned Body. And I like that point of view that a drawing is a drawing for something to be realized, but at a certain point it is realized. And once it is realized, it changes, but the drawing continues to exist in its form. So you have a sort of the life of the drawing next to the life of the realized object, which is quite beautiful, I think. So that was the drawing, the life of drawings in itself, but in landscape, drawings are, for me, in dialogue with the system. Landscape is in itself dynamic. Here's a very beautiful Asterix and Obelix view on it. They are no landscape architects, but they are struggling with an oak, as you see, and how quick it grows. Obelix argues, I've never seen how long it takes an oak to grow. And that's a problem, you could say, in landscape. Also in the real landscape, people have no idea how landscape operates, so to say. Here you could say is sort of mapping of landscape over time. This was a mapping we made in the Ruhrgebiet area, so it's not a design drawing, but it is an analytical drawing. And if you look at landscapes, it is really a problem how to understand it. This is, for example, a wadi. And I don't know if you know that word, but these are landscape systems to catch rainwater, if there is a peak of rainwater. So this seems like a very green, dry area, but it is made to catch a rainwater peak. And drawings, in a way, should reflect that. Here you have the point of the seasons in landscape, which is a very strong dynamism. How nice. How nice we are in. And obviously, ebb and flood is a strong dynamism in landscape. So you have, in fact, you have numerous dynamic processes, and if you relate it to people, it is the way, and that comes again to your work, how people are using spaces at certain moments. And then if you come back to drawings, for example, this is a series of drawings which tries to speak about the point that a landscape related to rivers acts different. The interesting point for students is that the next question could be, but what is the time scale and the time system? So sometimes it's day and night, and sometimes it's high water, low water. Sometimes it is regular, and sometimes it is irregular. And this helps enormously the understanding of the landscape. This was a beautiful drawing of how a planted and neatly designed garden could be rewilded by giving it over to time. And the student tried to show it in its drawing technique. We can come back to certain drawings. I think the lecture would take too long. This is a drawing which tries to capture options in landscape. And here, this is a typical Dutch drawing of landscape architecture, so to say, giving the condition for nature to redevelop. How should you transform landscape to invite natural processes? So all these drawings are about time and about many temporalities, in the word that was used earlier, cyclic time, progressive time, deep time, long time, short time, one moment, more moments, so many forms of time. However, different from what Simone told, most of my times are physical perspectives on time, because it is really happening in landscape, although there are also more narrative perspectives on it, and then it becomes a sort of story of what are we going to do and why. And then there is practice, and I like that practice perspective also as it relates in a different way to sociology or perhaps more anthropology, and that is the fact that landscape architecture also is a profession of people who perhaps want to earn money and work in groups and have power or not and strive for a position, and therefore they have to learn to master techniques, and young people are coming in with new techniques. They have certain materials and they are convinced that they communicate in a certain way. Perhaps they are trendy or old-fashioned or whatever. And importantly, drawing in itself as an activity takes time. So not only the drawing could reflect time, but it takes time to make it. This was a drawing I made by myself. It was black and white, it is inverted here, but it took me 3 days to make it. Kind of interesting to think of how making a drawing as taking time helps to reflect on what you want to draw. And this is, although it's quite a boring drawing, a key drawing in my work, because here a landscape architect makes a very simple technical drawing of trees to be planted. And then you look at this drawing and it raises many questions, not for the landscape architect, but for me, if I look at it from a philosophical point of view, because they have a certain scale. So you could say, okay, apparently the landscape architect wants trees of this size to be planted when it is realized. But it is not the case. He wants the trees to be big over a certain time. But the drawing does not tell us that this is a promise for over 15 years. And even if it was a promise for over 15 years, then the trees would grow on. So it would not stay the same. So what is then this drawing in relation to reality? It becomes a very difficult question if you really look at it. So I went into offices and I interviewed offices. Why do you do it? We all know that landscape is dynamic. Then why do we not draw it? How come? What is the history of it? Or what is the social context of what are our convictions or our economy or whatever? I could, for example, speak about visualizations, which are always surprisingly sunny, statistically not related to the realistic weather we have outside. So what is the communication in this? Or what is the communication in this, that if an office wants to be trendy, we draw in black and white? How come that we have those sort of ideas about our position? And that is very influential for my problem, because many of the offices related, they are not drawing time to reflections on how an office relates to a client and about social expectations. So that's interesting. And I thought it should be different, because we have, for example, this landscape architect from the 18th century, and he proposed a very simple technique, and it is this. This is the existing situation, and this is the new situation. It's the key time drawing. So it is one drawing with a sort of paper flap, and now we have 2 moments in time. It's sort of the first one who did it, but we never went on with it until nowadays, that some landscape architects propose time drawings in more analytical or more designerly ways. And I could explain these sort of drawings. This, by the way, if you know how to read drawings, I found this an intriguing drawing, because you think it is a section, but it is a time drawing. It is showing the development through the months over the year. Or a drawing for 4 seasons. A very beautiful, by the way, biological drawing, not a landscape architectural drawing about the life of insects. This relates to another beautiful book, which is the work of Edward Tufte about information design, which was also influential in my work. And then I found it nice to look in other disciplines and also in other art disciplines, because if you look at film or animation film or comic drawing, then you see a way of representation that is inherently about time. So I think, and also you showed very beautiful animated examples, that animation, for example, it's quite surprising that we do not use it so much in landscape architecture. It is a very good technique of embodying time. Here we have students doing a nice experiment with animation. They make a plan drawing, but they make it in such a way that they can photograph every step as if it would grow in that way. And then in the end, they had an animation film and a sort of ugly plan drawing. But the combination was intriguing. And here, for example, I had an experiment in Stuttgart of students working with dough, sauerteig, because that grows in your hands, so to say. So they noticed that it changed, and they tried to make drawings. And again, it's interesting to see that you have notational drawings, like we try to follow what happens, and we have design drawings. Can we make it happen? That's both sides of the coin. In which, for example, also drawing materials help. Here, people try to use watercolor to see if that could reflect what perhaps people dynamic in space could be. And I wanted to make, as an in-between point, I wanted to say it is not at all about beautiful drawings. I had a workshop in Cottbus with very young architecture students, and I didn't know how to draw landscape. But that is not important. The important thing is in how far trying to draw can help your knowledge build up. Trying to find out the simple question, okay, I know an oak, I have seen it, but I have no idea how it grows, how quick, and how it does it. So let's try to start to draw it. And even if it is an ugly drawing, it helps you understand. I have a small case, but perhaps that makes it too long. What do you think?
I think you have like, I would say, 10 minutes, no?
Okay, well, then I have enough time. Yeah. Okay. So I did a lot of workshops with students. Basically, my research was about the historical problem. Why do we do it as we do it? What is the tradition? What is the origin? The other part was more this anthropologic interviewing offices. Why are you doing it today? And the third layer was working with students. And for example, here with Danish students, we worked on an existing project made by the famous Danish landscape architect Sørensen. And this is a plan drawing from the 50s about a small housing object with an inner green structure, and that was what he designed. And if you look at the plan, you think you are looking at trees. But you are looking at circles, and in these circles, Sørensen planted 30 young trees per circle. But his final ideal was having the trees as today, big oaks. But if you see this, each big oak is the result of a circle of 30 trees. So going back to the plan, to this photograph, to this plan, he planted 1,000 small trees. And today there are 30 big trees. So the question to the student was, can you draw how this happened? And then the student had all sorts of solutions. For example, here you see the solution in watercolor, because you can see through it, it is transparent. And they try to show that there is a sort of original action which evolved over time by thinning and taking out trees to arrive at finally one tree. Or a sort of IKEA brochure, how you have to attack the situation. It was kind of intriguing for me, because you must realize if you plant 30 trees in the 50s, then in the 70s they are already 15 to 20 meters high. Now you are living there, and then people come and take out half of the 20 meters high trees, because some sort of landscape architect in the 50s said we should arrive at one tree. It's quite an intriguing problem how that happened. So they gave this IKEA instruction of how they should do it. And for example, also this as a sort of mapping how that process could have happened. There was one guy, and I found it quite interesting, he was not focusing on how we arrived at one tree, but he was focusing at the question, where did the rest go? It's quite a lot of wood, quite a lot of material. So this is it. Where did the rest go? So that was that. So my point is, and that comes back a bit to what you presented in your description of your project. From a landscape architecture perspective, this for me is a very important drawing. Many of my colleagues present a park or a garden in one drawing, as if we move towards a final situation, there it is, and it stays like it is. And it will never happen. Every landscape takes time, and every landscape will go on. So what are you drawing? So my basic question in educational situations is the understanding we cannot draw landscape in one drawing. We need at least a series of moments. And if you draw a series of moments, you have to design what moments, what are relevant moments. And this is a French drawing by Michel de Vigne, who here proposed to see a landscape in different stages and in different states as a sort of design intention. So there is not one ideal, but there is a process going on. And I think that's very important, because if you look at the huge issues we have to face in relation to climate change, but also migration processes, how our way of living changes, and especially the interaction between those, then it is quite difficult how to see landscape as a sort of idealized one state. I didn't use the word so much of insecurity and risk and these sort of things, or disaster, which are very important words in landscape. Landscape is not steady and just what it is. So my unsolved question for the coming years is, how can we catch that in drawings? How can drawings reflect those very complex interdependencies in landscape? This, for example, is it was a huge drawing, and this was by coincidence in Berlin. It was for the Tempelhof area in a competition, and Grossmax made a very big drawing how over 30 years the plan would come into existence. And you could say this is really a score, because what they did was the idea a plan will not happen at once, but over a long time certain people and groups and actions will happen to create something. And there is also uncertainty in it, so perhaps in 10 years we have 3 roads to choose, and they lead to other coming situations. And that's all about this basic problem in what I did, was that we generally draw in the what and where, and my interest was but who and when is coming to it, so the more choreography perspective. So that's what I like to work on, and also like to discuss with you, how we could think about it and how drawings could reflect. This is one drawing from the spool issue, and I took that because it is a drawing which is indeed trying to capture complex interdependencies in a time mode in one drawing. And here again, and this is the last one I wanted to show. So I have lots of work to do, because I think it really is a fascinating and a very relevant problem to tackle. And happy to present that here and to hear from you here in the room or anywhere on the world. I don't know where people are listening to us, what we can say about this. Thank you.